My oldest brother, who I was really close to, he came down with glioblastoma, which is really terrible form of brain cancer. I think when something like that happens to you or to somebody you know really well, and you're trying to see, what can I do, and you want to do something.
Welcome back to the CBIA BizCast powered by Google. I'm Amanda Marlowe, and I'm very, very happy and sad today to be joined by Paul Pescatello, CBIA's Senior Counsel and Executive Director of the Connecticut Bioscience Growth Council. And Paul is joining me today to talk a little bit about where the industry is in Connecticut, but also, Paul, I don't want to say the word retiring, but you're taking a little bit of a step back.
That's right, a little bit of a rebalancing.
And so we're happy to have you here to kind of not only talk about, the industry and what you've seen, but a little bit about your story. I think, as an individual and leader, especially in the bioscience field, you've certainly seen a lot, and you have quite an interesting story of your own. So let's dive in.
Okay.
So Paul, you started your career as an attorney.
Yep.
Tell me a little bit about that. What drew you to law?
So I was actually getting a PhD, and my dissertation was on a legal topic, and so that sort of led me to law school. And I really liked the subject of the law and certainly the practice of law. So I started doing it full time. And
what led you to, did you want to be a lawyer? Did you want to do more research? Kind of where did that come from?
Yeah, no, I really enjoyed the practice of law. I was a banking and insurance regulatory lawyer, and the firm that I worked for, Shipman and Goodwin, I was a partner there, and there was not a lobbying firm, and they needed somebody to do some lobbying to start a new bank, which there hadn't been a new bank in Connecticut for like 15 years. And there was actually legislation needed to make it happen. So I volunteered to be, and that's sort of how I learned how to lobby in Connecticut.
Was that a couple years into your career with Shipman that this came up, this opportunity?
Yeah, it was like 5 or 6 years into it, so I started lobbying the legislature for a new bank charter, which was successful.
What did you like about that aspect?
A lot of things. I mean, I like the policy part of it was really interesting. Talking to legislators, talking to staff, but frankly, just the physicality of it. So as a lawyer, you're sitting at a desk, for 12 hours a day. And as a lobbyist, you're literally running around the Capitol. It can be exhausting, but it was nice to actually move around.
Yeah, get up, talk to more people, and you're still doing a lot of arguing.
I enjoy a good argument, and so do a lot of that at the legislature.
And we moved from banking to bioscience. What happened there?
It was a lot of things, but sort of sadly, then this was a long time ago now, so it's sort of all in the rearview mirror. But my oldest brother, who I was really close to, he came down with glioblastoma, which is really terrible form of brain cancer. Something that Ted Kennedy, people might know, died of that. And so I was very much involved in his care and getting treatment for him. And I think when something like that happens to you or to somebody you know really well, and you're trying to see, what can I do, and you want to do something, you want to channel your energies into something that would help this person or help people in the future. And really, it's really the case that working on it for months with him and seeing all the different treatments, which are not very good. They're still not very good for glioblastoma. But I really came to the conclusion that the for-profit pharmaceutical companies were really doing the most effective, consequential research. And so I started doing some pro bono work in that area, and that ultimately led to starting or joining an organization, CURE, and running that organization, and then eventually to be here at the CBIA running their biopharma group.
You kind of stayed with Shipman. You'd been, doing really great banking, lobbying, and then this happened, and your passions kind of shifted a little bit.
Yeah, I really love the industry. It was such a fascinating industry, And, I think people here at the CBIA have heard me talk about it over and over again, but as costly as some drugs are, they really are a cost saver to the overall health system. I mean, so we want the innovation. And I found that aspect of the industry really, really interesting, and something that really the legislators needed to be educated about it. And the world kind of needs to know that. And that's our way out of the healthcare crisis ultimately. Even though people see drug prices as a huge barrier, how we pay for our healthcare system is a really important question. But we certainly don't want to tamp down the innovation in the pharmaceutical industry.
When you started really getting your feet wet in the bioscience pharmaceutical industry, where was Connecticut in terms of being a player in that industry?
Yeah, so Connecticut was going through a transition, right, from being much more of a manufacturing state, still really an important sector, but certainly a transition. Unemployment was relatively high, and so the state was looking for ways, the economic development, people were looking for ways to bring in new industries of the future, and certainly things that always came up over and over again was biotech, and so it's really been an amazing consensus, from governor to governor and from legislative session to legislative session, how much buy-in there is to what a good industry this is and how important it is for the state to be a leader in it, and it's really worked.
When you first started, was there, governor to governor, there was buy-in, but as the legislature as a whole, were you seeing a lot of pushback? What was and still are some of the misconceptions?
I'm certainly, I don't know so much a misconception, but it's just hard to wrap your mind around the really unique research and development arc of bringing a drug from idea to FDA approved product. So again, you all here at the CBI have heard me go on and on about it. It's really true. $2.7 billion and about 10 to 12 years to bring a drug from idea to product. And they're way more failures than there are successes. So getting legislators and policymakers to understand how much R&D goes into making a drug, how expensive that is, and that the companies and the investors have to recoup that investment. If they don't recoup it, they won't do the research. And if they don't do the research, we won't have the drugs. And actually, our healthcare system will be way worse for it. Certainly, patients will be way worse for it.
And that R&D is a very expensive aspect. That's really mostly only happening here in the U.S.
Right, exactly. That's one of my key points that I've been trying to make, especially the last couple of legislative sessions when legislators ask, why are drug prices so high here? And it's true. We really pay the world's R&D, and that's something definitely in the future that we have to work on other developed countries, other rich countries, to pay their fair share of R&D, because they're not. In most other countries, what the deal is, we will pay you a profit on your manufacturing cost, but the manufacturing cost of a drug is tiny compared to the R&D cost. And so if they're not paying for the R&D, that means we're paying for all of it. And I think there has to be a better understanding. I think there's increasing understanding of that, but that's the big change that has to go on in the future.
And that's why, you've pushed for so much, tax credits or other things to really help with those companies who are focusing so much on R&D, which is really a lot of what's happening here in Connecticut.
Right. I mean, research and development tax credits are a huge part of the incentive to get companies to start here and to grow here. And the thing that's really one of the things that was unique to Connecticut, it's been copied by a couple of other states, is the exchangeable R&D tax credit, meaning that for small companies, biotech companies just starting off, that 10-year period, 10 to 12-year period it takes to develop a drug, they're spending tons and tons of money, but they have no income coming in. So those research and development tax credits, while they can carry them forward into the future to use someday when they are making money, they can exchange them with the state and get 65 cents on the dollar. So it's money they don't have to go out and raise, and money that will go right back into research. So that really was a huge attraction to companies especially coming out of Yale and UConn, to get them to start here. Otherwise, the trend had been to go to the Boston, Cambridge area, or California, San Francisco, and San Diego.
What companies took advantage of that right away?
So certainly Alexion is our, as you drive into New Haven now,
Yeah,
you see the
you
Alexion.
can't miss that building
You
now.
can't miss that building. And that was one of the first. There were a lot. There's some have, faded into the sunset, and others have been absorbed by big pharma, which is increasingly becoming the model of the small companies coming out of the universities, doing the basic R&D, and then the large pharmaceutical companies purchasing them and then doing the follow-on development, like the clinical trials, which are a huge part of that R&D equation.
Yeah, and that's where things get even more expensive, I imagine.
Yeah.
Once you get into those
clinical trials are the biggest expense in developing a drug.
And what have you noticed in terms of the companies? Like what changes have you seen at the companies over the years, as legislation has evolved, as research has evolved?
Yeah, no, it's really interesting. So when I started, any company coming out of a university would essentially become a mini pharmaceutical company, meaning it had employees doing the whole range of things. And it was a pretty large employee profile. And over time, the ability to certainly things like AI, we didn't call it AI 10 or 15 years ago, but being able to use artificial intelligence and just computer databases to shortcut some of the research and to model some of the things that used to be done, physically in laboratories, in petri dishes with people. And so the companies now can start earlier out of their academic labs with fewer people. Well, so essentially we have more companies now with fewer employees per company, but overall it's an increase in biotech employment in the state. And going forward, hopefully you have more and more companies like Alexion. Arvinas is another company, which now have hundreds of employees.
What do you think it's going to take for these companies to continue to stay here in Connecticut, grow here in Connecticut?
Certainly, we have to stay competitive. Things like the research and development tax credits. Other states have copied that. We have to keep keep in the game on that. I think also Connecticut has a relatively unique parliamentary system in the sense of like the types of bills that legislators can propose early in the session. So any legislator can propose any number of bills, and some will have no chance of passage, that are very anti the industry or will be very harmful to the industry's business model. They have no chance of going anywhere, but they create a lot of fear in the minds of biotech executives, and certainly can chill any thought they might have about coming to Connecticut if they're not already here or growing in Connecticut. And I think legislators understanding that sometimes their rhetoric can be harmful in that way is really important. Something we all have to work on.
Yeah, I mean, it's something simple that they say to, on the campaign trail can really hurt a company from wanting to grow here.
I think most consumers, most patients would assume from the rhetoric that drug prices are the number one driver of healthcare costs. They're only, again, you all have heard me say it a million times, it's only 10 to 15% of the healthcare equation. It's been that way since World War II. So the other 85% are hospitals, insurance costs, all sorts of other costs. And so it's not just drug prices, and the legislation you often read about is as if we put price controls on drugs, we'll solve the problem. Price controls will kill innovation and will kill the industry in this state, and it won't solve the problem.
That's certainly an argument that you've been pretty successful in getting across.
Trying to
at this point. In terms of, the drug creation that's happening here, what are some of the different milestones that you've seen? I know you're really involved with Rare Disease Day and a lot of the companies that are working here, but what are some of the most unique drug discoveries that are happening here in Connecticut?
Yeah, I think what's really, I derive a lot of satisfaction from the range of companies that are here and the range of products that would come out of Connecticut. So I think early on, there was probably a focus on oncology, on cancer research. But now you really see companies in sort of every part of it. And also medical devices has grown. Medical IT is a huge part of it. There are companies that are doing, computer models to bring down the cost of psychiatric evaluation, things like that. So it's really amazing. One of the over the last couple of decades, right? We've seen things like stem cell was a big stem cell research and stem cell therapy, which has now become commonplace. But certainly CRISPR, which is the ability to cut and paste genetic material and actually cure genetic diseases, is sort of Connecticut's in the forefront of that. But seeing that used in so many companies is really satisfying.
One of the terms that we've been hearing, across the country is that whole genome sequencing and biomarker testing. And some of that research is happening here. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Almost every company in some way is using biomarker testing and whole genome sequencing, sort of a way to diagnose disease and then to treat disease. So, a lot of times you come up with a drug, and you want to see very clearly if and how it's working. And so biomarker testing is a way to come up with markers of disease progression or disease regression. So to be able to take a sample, a blood sample or some other type of sample from a patient, do genetic testing on it, is amazing how it shortens the time it takes to diagnose a disease and how much more effective it makes treatment of a disease. And so we've seen a lot of that, and a lot of the companies using that. So matching a drug to a testing protocol has been, I think, a huge game changer in patient treatment.
What do you think has surprised you the most about, once you kind of dove into this industry? What surprised you the most?
I think that's a good question. I think how emotional the industry is. And so certainly in the legislature, certainly among, certain patient groups and certain advocacy groups, because healthcare, it's so important to all of us. It is literally sometimes life and death. It's a super emotional issue. And a lot of legislators and policymakers approach it that way. And so I guess when I started out, it was more with these, certain diseases and healthcare, it's a problem to be solved. And I guess I wish that people had a more rational approach to it, but that's not the way the world works. And so I think people understanding the emotional side of it is really critical to effective advocacy. I think we at the CBIA do that really well, sort of understanding that and having to address that.
And so you're talking like even having to, someone's so emotional, they feel one way, but once you have to kind of bring them back to the practicality in order to get movement.
Yeah, and certainly, we saw that in vaccines. So Connecticut was sort of in the forefront of removing the religious exemption for vaccine use, because we had cohorts of people not taking their vaccines, the childhood vaccines, and wanting their kids to go to school and expose other kids to diseases. And it's really easy for somebody to say, "Oh, this group of kids has autism, they took a vaccine, therefore that's the cause." And the evidence is absolutely not there. It's been disproven, but it can become.
But it's so emotionally tied.
If your child has some condition, say autism, it's understandable how emotional it can become. And if somebody will give you that argument that the link, even if it's absolutely not true, that link to like a vaccine or a drug or whatever, then you have to address that emotional side of it. And you have to realize that people are really, kind of in pain emotionally, and that needs to be addressed.
That was a little different than when you were lobbying for the banking side.
Yes. Banking is not that emotional.
You don't have as many emotions running around in people. What do you think, what's your message? I know you're not, completely leaving the scene, but what's your message to, the general public, to lawmakers, as we continue to hear so much about bioscience, what's going to happen with the industry, obviously raising prices the drug control is still so much part of the conversation.
I think one way to look at the future, or way to like the message to policymakers and lawmakers going forward, is to look at antibiotic research and to look at the menu of antibiotics we have. We are running out of antibiotics. There's more and more antibiotic resistance, and the world is used to a very low cost for antibiotics. If you want more antibiotics, and we are going to need them in the next 10 years, we're going to need a new class of antibiotics to cure bacterial disease. You have to understand the R&D arc, that the cost of developing a new antibiotic is the same as an oncology drug, as a cancer drug. And so we have to wrap our minds around, if we want those new antibiotics, and believe me, we are going to need them, there's going to be a real pullback in elective surgery if we don't develop them. That means we have to be willing to pay more for them to get the companies to do the innovation and bring the drugs to market. And I would just say too, another thing that I'm always trying to educate people about is that as much as you might hear that the government pays for biopharma research, it's just not true. The government pays a lot of money in research grants for some very early stage basic research, which is hugely important, hugely fundamental. But for whatever reason, fortunately or unfortunately, almost every single drug on the market has been done by the private sector, has been taken from that early stage idea. And a lot of those early stage ideas come from the private sector, but some do come from academic research paid for by the government. But that most of that $2.7 billion is funded by the private sector. And we have to wrap our minds around that and go with it, because that's where the innovation comes from. So for whatever combination of reasons, it just doesn't come out of nonprofit organizations or government labs.
What role do you think Connecticut has the potential to play in this next chapter?
It could be a huge role. I mean, as we all know, in all sorts of economic development areas, we're a fantastic location in the Northeast. We're around so many, elite research institutions. We're near the financial capital of the world, New York, and the venture capital in Boston. So if we don't mess it up, we have the potential. If we have the right menu of economic development incentives, we could continue to grow. The sector has really grown. It's something we should all really take a victory lap for. How big the industry is, and in Connecticut, and how sustainable it is. I think what's really also very satisfying to see that companies live and die, and they get bought up and moved to other places, but we have a steady stream of companies coming out of our academic research centers that keeps that overall number growing.
Yeah. So even when those other companies are acquired, well, you've got 3 more rolling out of Yale or UConn.
Exactly,
that are kind of adding back into the picture.
Yeah, and I would also say that the investment in Jackson Labs, created like another, research institution that has been very helpful in getting intellectual property grown right here in Connecticut. People ask me all the time, like, what's the number one thing we could do if we could bring in another Yale or academic institution? That would be great. We're not going to entice Harvard to move to Connecticut, but creating Jackson Labs, incentivizing Jackson Labs to set up a really important research lab here in Connecticut was hugely beneficial. And there's been a lot of great research that has come out of Jackson Labs. Yeah,
they've been able to really, at least the team there, the research there has been pretty monumental.
It has. Again, it's a little bit like bringing in a Harvard or a Stanford into Connecticut. So it was a clever economic development move.
As you kind of, your what was the word you used at the beginning?
Rebalancing.
As you're rebalancing, I'm sure you're also kind of just reflecting as well on some of the lessons that you've learned along the way. What advice do you have to young business leaders or young lobbyists?
I think 2 things. Again, you have to understand the emotional component of it, that if you're going to win an argument, you have to understand that and address that. And then you have to be relentless. You have to sort of make your argument over and over again, and you can't take it personally when someone doesn't get it the first time around or the 10th time around. And that's really it.
How helpful has the businesses that you've worked with been in your efforts?
How helpful have?
Yeah, I mean, like how obviously you're up there lobbying, but you need them to support you.
Yeah, I think definitely. So certainly the businesses supporting associations like the CBIA, and most of the companies have their own government affairs people, and so we try to work in tandem, which has been really helpful. And I think the CBIA lobbying team, I'm always telling our members and companies that we're the only organization up there at the Capitol all the time, and just the team approach of being able to rely on somebody else to cover a hearing or to deliver a message, across the board to other legislators is super helpful and very effective, an effective way to lobby.
So what's next for Paul Pescatello? So
I'm going to stay. I definitely want to stay. I love the industry, and I really care about it in terms of its effect, on all of us and on certainly, patients and disease, understanding the mechanisms of disease and finding treatments and cures for disease. So I'm gonna continue. We're going to do a little work for CBIA and some of the biopharma companies that I've come to know. And I do a little venture capital work too. So I'm going to be doing that as well. And
Paul's also a very incredible writer as well. So hopefully maybe we'll get to see some work out of you. Yeah, now that you'll get some more downtime for that. Yeah. Even though I know you've got a new grandchild too. So
I have 5 grandchildren now.
Yeah. You're a little bit busy now.
Yeah.
Any final thoughts to the, CBIA business community?
So again, CBIA is the only, thing in town in terms of really having the bandwidth in terms of the number of lobbyists and the staff to really get a message to legislators and it's not just legislators, it's their staff, it's policymakers in the executive branch to deliver that message. And as I said, like being relentless is part of it. And so delivering it, coming back at it, just the ability, the expertise of everybody here in terms of, understand, being able to, read a 60-page bill pretty quickly and understand it and communicate it in common English to our members who often we get them involved to call legislators, but they first have to understand a bill, and translating, the legalese of a 60-page bill into a couple of effective bullet points is really a skill that it's pretty impressive that we have that here at CBIA.
Great. Well, Paul, thank you so much. We really, really appreciate your time here today, but also your time, and what you give into the bioscience community.
This was great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this week's BizCast. You can listen, like, and subscribe to our podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Please leave us a review and let us know if you have ideas for a future podcast. And for more episodes, head on over to cbia.com.